Hey all, Andy from Ant Panda. We're going to discuss the next lore of the game, one of the most genre-defining and changing games, Command and Conquer. Released in 1995 by Westwood Studios, Command and Conquer would go on to define the genre of real-time strategy, to go on to sell hundreds of thousands to even 30 million copies by 2009. Command and Conquer defined the genre of real-time strategy. Westwood Studios previously released Dune 2, which actually also was known as a commercial success. Command & Conquer recently just got remastered by a number of studios from Electronic Arts of game mechanics, music, as well as FMV videos. So this is lore of the game, Command & Conquer. Command & Conquer opens up in the modern day 1990s by showing different types of FMVs, revealing kind of the setting of normal civilians and people living in this day and age, showing different types of news programs, energy drinks in what looks like oil drums and oil containers, as well as cheesy soap operas, exercise videos, and then even modern day military, showing an aircraft carrier and a number of news factions discussing the military's use and strength of it today. The setting opens up with a modern day take in the 90s with two main factions that you actually run into, where you have to make a selection between the Global Defense Initiative, represented by a raven or eagle and a gold emblem, or the Brotherhood of Nod, also revealed as a scorpion in red. Selecting one of these two factions will take you on a different story and different fate as you complete missions in real-time strategy. If you select the Global Defense Initiative, you then are introduced to the head of the GDI faction, or in this case, probably the UN military force that is funded by them in multiple countries. The leader of the GDI, Commander Shepard, starts to introduce you to what it is that you're facing, which is the Brotherhood of Nod. As he starts to do that, though, then new missions come in, and then you are provided basically different objectives. GDI really focuses a lot on base building and all your different objectives. As the story progresses, you then are working directly with Commander Shepard, and he eventually does talk about a little bit about Kane and the Brotherhood of Nod and what you're facing. Eventually, though, Commander Shepard does end up going on a civilian, or civvy time is what he calls it, with visiting and discussing with the UN summit about why the GDI forces are necessary and funding. In doing this, you then are commanded by additional characters in the story, with Carver and also Morelli, who happens to be a soldier and a female pilot of new technological wonder known as the Orca, which is then a new technology created. The nice thing is this modern take on military actually ends up turning into a little bit more of a science fiction story as they introduce Tiberium. Tiberium, which is introduced in the FMVs as an alien type of non-carbon based organism, then it looks as though it's presented as a comet that hits the Earth and then starts taking over and starts evolving the DNA of the world, taking over soil and nutrients and crops and even trees, to then show and become exposed as very valuable material as green crystals, which then becomes toxic to humans and other people in nature. GDI uses this as a method by having another source of income, and then uses this technology to further its of new tech. involving the ion cannon, mammoth tanks, and more. Harvesters, which are then created by refineries, are then created so that you can actually obtain and collect these valuable crystals that are used to actually provide you funding during missions and while you're playing Command and Conquer. Even though it's a unique and interesting take, it also adds also an interesting element, as Tiberium is a great fund your army, but is also toxic to any humans or any people that walk over and run over these particular crystals.
Unknown.
The mechanics of Command and Conquer is amazing, mainly because it allows you to build bases based on using a construction yard, and each building that you create unlocks and it provides additional options for you to actually build and create buildings, as well as different forces through the use of barracks
and they remastered
and
them.
weapons,
Of course, they only
factories,
remastered them
airports,
so much
etc.
because they're still pretty
GDI
low.
does focus
low
on
rendered, but-
major and huge tanks, guard towers, as well as
Let's build a few tanks.
missile towers and missile type units. While the Brotherhood of Nod uses and captures the opposite by using very similar in regards of warfare, for the exception of lesser intense tanks by having stealth tanks, flame tanks, and the use of flame technology. Instead of guard towers, they also use turrets, and instead of missile towers, they also use the Obelisk of Light, which is a laser that actually is used to destroy units and people. As the GDI story progresses, you end up finding out that From Shepard is dealing with the manipulation of media that is starting to show GDI in the wrong light, and in doing so is actually showing that GDI is either taking advantage by destroying and killing civilians, and they even mention of children. While this happens, the UN funding, or the funding for GDI, is at its all-time low, which is used as part of the story arc of certain missions of why you're not given the best equipment and technology to start in these missions. It actually sends a really good arc, and because it emphasizes the misinformation that comes about with social media, which actually is more true about it today than it was back in the day when this was discussed. Eventually the story is revealed that Shepard comes back and starts commanding you for missions as well, and starts to mention that this was a big hustle in order to give the Brotherhood of Nod, or the leader of Brotherhood of Nod, Kane, a false sense of security by assuming that GDI is weak at this point. By this point of the game, you're closer towards the end, where you're actually then starting to build bigger and bigger bases with more technology, with the introduction of Orca, missile towers, and eventually the most awesome and amazing technology that they have been working on for years, finally at your disposal with the ion cannon. As you're towards the end of the GDI story, you eventually find the last stronghold of Kane and the Brotherhood of Nod by finding their sacred temple that is used in order for them to do their own research into not just new technology, but also its uses and wonders of Tiberium. By the end of the GDI mission, when your final mission is over, Shepard looks very exhausted and tells you that Kane is held up in this particular temple, and for you to take out the bastard once and for all, or die trying. Basically emphasizing that this is the final mission and failure is not an option. The nice thing about the GDI ending is that there are multiple endings that come with it. If you complete the mission by destroying the actual temple in the normal method without the ion cannon, it has one ending where it actually shows the end of Kane and his destruction under a pile of rubble, and then followed by a news report and talking about how the GDI forces were victorious after a stalemate of technology, but through the use of great tactics and intelligence, indicating that the player is the reason why they won versus the Brotherhood of Nod. An alternate ending can be also unlocked if you decide to use the ion cannon on the Temple of Nod, and when doing so shows a different ending showing Cain fading into the light of the ion cannon, in which they reveal in the news report that talks about how it would have been weeks without the use of the ion cannon, which was required. This is just one part of the story. The nice thing with the replay value of Command & Conquer is that you can also play as the Brotherhood of Nod, which is done a little bit differently. In the Brotherhood of Nod side of things, you are introduced to Seth, who is the right-hand man, or the right hand of Cain, from God to Cain to Seth, and then to you. The nice thing about the Nod story is it makes you feel as though you're kind of going up in the ranks versus ultimately meeting up with the leader of the faction. You don't ultimately meet Cain, you don't ultimately know him, and basically you just know of him before you even discuss or even work with him on discussing plans for world domination.
Never got a chance to meet him, though.
Nod is funded by its own manipulation of the stock market as well as social media. And that's another interesting point and interesting side of this particular story is that Nod uses media as a way of manipulation in order to actually capitalize on the advantage of showing the wrongdoings and terrible things of GDI. And it's an interesting take and an interesting method. With Nod missions, most of their missions are done with squad base instead of base building, where either you start with a squad and complete the mission, or you start with a squad and actually then get in touch with a base or a damaged base and then repair it, bring it up to speed, and then annihilate GDI forces. GDI, since it uses a little bit more in warfare, a lot of the Nod forces and such have a lot more to do with anti-warfare by having SAM sites, as well as capitalizing on stealth technology, as well as flame technology, which is an interesting yin and yang kind of warfare, as flame tanks and actual flame troopers or flamethrower troopers are actually able to capitalize and destroy infantry as well as guard towers very easily and buildings, as versus GDI's forces with using grenaders. Nod's story continues to evolve, and as you do, you tend to complete these missions, and Seth himself starts to get annoyed and aggravated and somewhat jealous of your expertise, which is what's amazing about the Nod shift. It even goes into the point of when Seth is starting to get annoyed with you that he tries and attempts to thwart your attempts in moving up in the chain of command of Nod by actually attempting to try to make you strike the Pentagon in the United States. In doing so in this particular FMV, it actually shows Seth's ultimate demise, which is then vanquished by Cain, who then says the funny word of, power shifts very easily in Cain, or in the Brotherhood of Nod.
Hi, Cain.
As soon as you're met with Cain, he's a very suave that seems to cater and pander to your ability of commanding forces and winning and completing missions. Every time, though, you do end up meeting Cain, for the most part, he's always carrying around his trusty silver Beretta, the same one that he ultimately offed Seth with, and never leaves his sight without it. As the Nod story continues, you see the fake news articles with Nod manipulating the media by using satellites and also sending media copies to several media outlets of GDI vanquishing and destroying and killing civilians. As you complete missions as Nod, ultimately you take care of these different scientists for the GDI forces to stop this research and to ultimately prevent ion cannon from being completed. GDI does complete the ion cannon as it did in the first story, But the Nod story is a little bit different, as you eventually do vanquish a lot of forces of GDI, and the actual social media manipulation actually helps out. You ultimately does end up finding a location for its final temple, which is the same temple that you destroy in the GDI story, and actually place it down after defeating GDI in a lot of different areas in Saratoga. Once doing so, the great final resolve of Command & Conquer for the last final missions is Nod ends up defining and looking at ways of capitalizing on the evolution of Tiberium into evolving them to the next level. Even though the ultimate result and discussion of that never comes to conclusion in Command & Conquer, it is something that does come up in the later series of Tiberian Sun and a few other things. Nod does complete its final mission by having different cyber soldiers actually going in the internet with different security codes, where after going through the different defense mechanisms in the internet to actually obtain and use the ion cannon, which actually is completed and finished also in the Nod story. In doing so, the ultimate conclusion, though, of the Nod story is that they have won and vanquished the GDI to the point where they have full access and control of the ion cannon, and the player is then given a choice to ultimately knock out one of 4 major locations of the world. That includes the White House, Paris, Greece, and another location as well. And each one actually has its own different ending and its own different news report, as it gives you a little bit more of a choice to the play. Command & Conquer is one game to be celebrated, especially with the new remaster.
Oh man!
Not only have the
updated
game
graphics
mechanics
look
been
really cool,
redone so that the UI actually matches and works really well to purchasing, building, and commanding. The maps and the resolution has been upgraded so it will work flawlessly on your computer
when comparing
and new up-to-date
to what it
rigs,
looked like,
as well as
here
switching
to this.
between classic graphics
New construction
or the new
options.
cleaned up graphics of all the units and buildings. Not to mention Frank Klepecki and the
Building.
Sons of Tiberium, or the
On
Tiberian
hold.
Sons,
Cancel.
ultimately redid
Building.
all of the music and the soundtrack
little bit
of
further
Command
away.
& Conquer, as well as Red Alert. Now, what also comes included as well is the Red Alert Remastered, which is included with this. So it is highly recommended to purchase that, play it, enjoy it, and just capitalize on a part of history. And then ultimately, while you're doing so, feel free to take a look at my next video that talks about some fan theories that I have of Command & Conquer. Thanks for sticking around for Lore of the Game. I'm Andy from Ant Panda, and I'll catch you in the next video.